Hello again. This is Kevin Doran back on the Newsmaker Show after almost a month now. And my thanks to Brian O'Neill for filling in. Today, we are going to be talking about the cover-up or the cover-ups or covers-up. I'm not sure which is correct. Of the cover-ups or covers-up. If you're confused, you probably ought to be. Stay tuned.
It's time for the Newsmaker Show on News Talk AM 1480 WLEA. Here's Kevin Doran.
Dan Gaynor, frequent guest from the Media Research Center. What is it, Dan? Is it covers up or cover-ups? What is it?
I think it's cover-ups.
Cover-ups. The S after the P, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and it's no matter how you look at it, it's a lot of them, and it's terrifying. I mean, this is not your run-of-the-mill Washington story where you can kind of laugh at it, something like that. The issue here is whether our own government not only corruptly investigated citizens, like the Stasi did in East Germany, but then may have gotten rid of the evidence, and then the media complicity by not covering it.
And you're talking about one of the cover-ups, and that would be the IRS. Now, you know, we have to assume that a lot of listeners to this program, in fact, the majority, are not Fox News watchers, and therefore they don't know. They simply have not been told about what's going on at the IRS. So why don't you summarize that for us? Then we'll talk about why the media is going out of its way to cover this story up.
Well, I mean, to summarize it, you really have to go back several years. You have to go back to 2010. When left-wing groups funded by George Soros decided to make an issue out of these 501c4s, the political nonprofits that have sprouted up because of new interpretations of the law. And they're both on the left and the right, but they got concerned about only the ones on the right. And they pushed Congress to investigate them or to lobby the IRS to do so. That's followed by congressional figures lobbying the IRS, which remarkably followed by investigation, harassment, massive number of questions, all sorts of things that these conservative nonprofits had to put up with, including long delays in getting their approval for nonprofit status, which really makes it difficult to raise money. So then when that scandal broke a long time ago, it seems now. We've been told so many different versions of the story. But recently, of course, Congress was investigating. They announced that there were a variety of top people at the IRS that they wanted the email from, and magically, the hard drives of all 7 of the people that they were trying to get hold of all had problems, all were damaged, and all lost the email that the IRS wants. I know this is. I mean, if you were a betting person and you bet on this, imagine buying one ticket and expecting to win the lotto 4 times in a row. That's pretty much what we're talking about as far as equivalent. It's just unheard of, and so a lot of people in Congress don't believe it. And unfortunately, a lot of people in America don't know about it because they watch ABC, CBS, and NBC.
And they have no idea. They have no idea.
CBS has done a better job than the others. I will give them that credit. I find myself saying that more and more. CBS, while it's still far from being what it should be, they have become the benchmark that I at least measure the other 2 networks against.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. But you left off a couple things, and again, I'm going to assume that a lot of people have no idea about this because they rely on the major networks. It's oddly enough the only one where you get all of the news and then decide what you want to believe or not believe, but the other ones don't even tell you. So let me go back. What were some of the questions the IRS and the FBI were asking these conservative groups? Like,
they were asking for, first of all, it wasn't just questions. It was, I think, interrogation is a better way of it.
That's right. What? Let me help you along. Are you a Christian? do you pray? What do you pray about? Are you for or against Israel? Because pro-Israel groups were also getting it. I mean, it's like the Gestapo. And if the IRS, frightening as that is, came after you, the IRS plus the FBI, I mean, you'd be terrified. Rightly so.
The idea, the IRS coming after you, asking for enormous amounts of information.
Yes.
I mean, just printouts of all sorts of stuff on your website, all sorts of things like that. It was intimidating. It was intended to be intimidating.
Yeah.
I mean, there were Tea Party groups that simply gave up trying to pursue their nonprofit status because these are groups. Everybody at home can relate to this. Imagine if you got your neighbors together to form some sort of group because you were motivated on a topic, but to successfully run your group, you had to get nonprofit status, and then the IRS starts asking you a whole ream of questions. The odds are you'd give up. A lot of them did, understandably.
Sure, they were terrified. I know of one case of a gal, and hers was a religious problem. She was a religious person, which is now getting to be dangerous. And she was writing religious columns, but she mentioned something about, I think, Obamacare. They came right after her, and she said, "I dropped out. They terrified me," and I understand that. Okay, now let's go to the hearings that were blocked out, except for CNN. Excuse me, CBS did give it a slight mention. NBC, it never happened. ABC, it never happened. MSNBC, it never happened. CNN, it never happened. Fox did report it, and reported it well, fairly. And those were the hearings held this week with the IRS commissioner being questioned by Republicans who are going after the IRS and the Democrats who are portraying this guy, and it may well be true, as an honest, decent guy, and look what these nasty Republicans are doing to him. But that's not going to fly because they're coming after him with some pretty sharp cookies, like Trey Gowdy.
Well, first of all, this is not a standard bureaucrat. This is a political appointee.
Mm-hmm.
This is a guy who's given. I literally 2 seconds before you called, practically, we were looking on a website that lists political donations, and donation after donation after donation to Democrats.
This guy,
yes,
Connican. How does he say his name? It's a strange name.
Koskinen.
Koskinen, right? Okay.
Yeah.
It is a strange name, though. It's hard to pronounce.
That's okay. What's he going to do? Come and yell at us? I mean, I care more about whether he's doing his job than whether I get his name is pronounced right on radio. So he's a six-figure donor to Democrats. 6 figures. I mean, and seriously, anybody listening right now, do you have $100,000 that you could give to whatever political party you support? The odds are probably not. So, I mean, that puts him in perspective. Literally, at least one of the people who he was on the committee interviewing him was somebody he's given money to.
Is that right? Who was that, by the way?
The unofficial delegate from D.C., Eleanor Holmes Norton.
And she talked about what a wonderful guy he was. Well, if you gave me $50,000, I'd like him too. Yeah.
Yeah, he's given her cash. If he gave me cash, maybe I might be tempted. I probably wouldn't, but it sounds good in theory. So I mean, what happened here? And of course, Paul Ryan went on a rant interviewing Koskinen, and it was very memorable. It's perhaps not as over the top as if I had been giving the rant myself, because if I had been doing it, it would have had lots of colorful language. Let's just say language that you and I know better than to discuss on radio. But I would have certainly deployed if I was in a congressional hearing, because this story is about government harassment. This story is about what government can do to ordinary citizens. And then the story is also about, this is no small import, how little the major media tell you what's going on in your life.
It's not so much that they lie, it's that they ignore. Now, I would think an IRS going after individuals, on the basis of their political or religious beliefs. That is a major story. And yet, it never happened. It's not happening now. Now, that's one. When we get back, we're going to talk with Dan Gaynor of the Media Research Center, and thank God there are people like them out there. We'll be back in just a moment with the other scandals that the media is complicit in. Folks, there is a major cover-up going on in the administration, not the first administration to cover up. But I got to tell you, it makes Watergate look like kids' play. It truly does. And I was one of the majority of Americans who thought Nixon ought to go for what he did. But Nixon just talked about using the IRS to go after people. Somebody in Washington, and it's not the Republicans, somebody in Washington's actually doing it, using the IRS to terrify and shut up people, and the FBI along with them. I mean, it is scary. But that's only one. Here's another one I want to bounce off you, Dan. And again, we can thank Megyn Kelly of Fox News for breaking this story. It turns out that all these kids, now again, if you're watching the main networks, you won't know this, but there are 65,000 kids since the first of the year coming up from Central America, riding boxcars. Some of them have died along the way. Little kids. Some of them teenagers, a lot of them little kids. Anywhere in the world, this would be a major humanitarian story, but it's a non-event for the major media. And now we find out, thanks to Megyn Kelly, that the White House knew this was going to happen in January, and they started to advertise for people to pick up these kids and help move them around the country. Good Lord. How can the media turn their eye on little kids? And the fact that the government is doing this intentionally. But again, there's another cover-up, right?
Well, what they do, they do this one a little differently. This one is they hide in plain sight. They've indeed reported some about the border. But what they don't do is report the whole story. They don't talk about Obama's connection. They don't talk about the amount. They certainly, they'll admit it's a problem, but what the network journalists, what their talking points are geared toward is for us to let all these kids come here and stay. Yeah. So they'll find the obligatory, I think it was CBS that did this, so I won't be totally complimentary of them, but they found the obligatory illegal immigrant child, and they found her mother, and they wouldn't say, that she's also here illegally. We're just left to presume, because journalists don't like to admit that. And so talking about, now they're back together. Everything's okay. They're now back together. What they don't talk about is everything's not okay. They're living in a country where there is no amnesty right now. It's just presumed, and that's what all this is coming from. It is the presumption of amnesty. When you create a policy, as the Obama administration has done, about immigration that lets everybody in the world think that our immigration rules don't matter, you end up with what we've got right now, literally an army of people trying to march across the border because they know they can become American citizens soon.
And somebody sent them that message. Isn't that right?
Well, they clearly have gotten that message from the administration. And even now, even after this has come out, you see statements from people like Joe Biden saying that, they won't, that some of them will have to go home. No, that's not saying that we're, the truth. The truth of the matter is many of them, or perhaps all of them, will end up staying.
Sure.
And so the media will talk about it as a humanitarian crisis, but even then they want to point fingers at the United States so that we are more sympathetic toward whatever we can do to fix this problem. We did not bring these children here. We did not kidnap these children. In fact, Broadcast News has brought on people from at least, I think, El Salvador and Honduras, officials from those countries. And you know what they come on and do? they complain about the treatment the kids are getting. And the journalists are not asking them the most obvious of all questions, which of course is, when are you taking the children from your country back?
Mm-hmm.
If you're not happy about the situation here, aren't you moving to bring all these children back? Because the answer is, of course, no, they're not.
No. Well, listen, it is a heart-rending story. Any parent looking at those little kids, particularly the little kids, your heart breaks. You say, "Oh my God, somebody take that kid!" But the question is, do we have a border or don't we have a border?
No, we don't.
And
right now, we don't.
Some guy in Virginia, at a little small town in Virginia, if you watch CBS, NBC, or ABC, you don't know this, but he stood up and said, "When did the United States become an orphanage?" All right, now let me get to another question, Dan. I haven't any remembrance of the media being so remiss, so terribly, terribly biased, in this case in favor of Barack Obama and his minions. But let me ask you this. Is this the first that we've ever seen this? Has it ever been this bad that the media has simply shut down and said, okay, what do you want us to say today? In other words, the state-controlled media. Is this the first time this has ever happened?
I would say, there's a lot more media now, which means the opposition word does get out a little bit. But I think for its time, probably JFK was just as bad. If you go back in history and look at how the media treated JFK, even before he got elected, how they came out publicly and said it's important that Americans treat John F. Kennedy the same as they would people from other religions, because, of course, Kennedy was Catholic, and that was viewed as controversial at the time. And so they were very aggressive in defending his faith and defending him from the very beginning. And then if you fast forward quite literally 50 years to the Mitt Romney campaign, Mitt Romney, a Mormon, viewed as somewhat controversial by some people in this country, the media took the exact opposite tactic.
That's right.
Oh, he's a Mormon. What his faith says about these major issues is important. This is a salient aspect of things, etc. It was literally 50 years later, the major media had taken a step back and said that there almost is something akin to a religious litmus test, just because Mitt Romney was from a conservative faith.
All right, now, we've only touched on two scandals. Benghazi is a big one. We know now from Ed Klein's book, if you're inclined to believe Ed, and I am, I've interviewed him several times, and Doug Schoen, a very close friend of the Clintons, said, yeah, I believe what Ed said, yeah. That Hillary knew, of course, the first night that it was not a film or a video. It was, in fact, a terrorist attack. This is according to Ed Klein. But she got a phone call from Barack Obama who said, look, we're going to call this the result of that video that hardly anyone saw. Some poor slob from Egypt, I guess, went to jail for a year. Jeez. For a movie nobody saw. And she said, wait a minute, who's going to believe that? And he said, doesn't matter. That's the story. That's the party line. We're going with that. And they did for a long time. Now, of course, that blew up, too, eventually.
But see, it doesn't matter now. If you watched the Hillary town hall the other night, and one of the questions was about Benghazi, and Hillary deployed an answer that you could say they're using against the media in every one of these cases, Fast and Furious, Benghazi, and you just go down the line, Solyndra, all the Obama scandals. But what they do is they release facts that are wrong, they stall, they hem and they haw, they then later on change their story. I think on the Bergdahl case, just in the Bergdahl case, in the first week, they had released like 9 different talking points that were refuted by resulting news in the first week. So, but what their response to this now is the fog of war.
That's the term now, right? Fog of war.
So that's what Hillary used for Benghazi. She said, "Oh, well, you can't. You have to understand it was the fog of war." And by now, they have muddied or fogged up the situation so much that ordinary Americans have no clue what's going on.
Most Americans are not well informed, and I don't think they have to be. They trust these people to be honest, decent, true, patriotic Americans, and it's a misplaced trust in many cases. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, you need to be a good news consumer, and if you read information only from the right, you need to read the left.
I do both.
If you read the traditional media, you need to read a little bit from the right and a little bit from the left to find out what they're missing.
Mm-hmm. That's right. If you care. Now, all right, Dan, our time is gone. I'm sure this is just the beginning of what's going to be a major story that could lead to the impeachment of Barack Obama. So at least a big effort to impeach him.
Well, I was going to say, I think at this point, with only 2 years left, I don't think the GOP will go that route.
Well, probably not. And who wants Joe Biden?
Right, and that's the other point either. Talk about, I will not use his famous words to Barack Obama that he dropped, but this would be a big thing.
Yes, right. Yeah. Joe's a little careless with his language, right? Okay, yeah. Dan, stay on the line just a moment. Dan Gaynor from Media Research Center. They have a website. You can find it. Folks, I have always used this example. I admired the Polish people because during the communist crackdown in the 80s, the communists controlled media. I believe they had their news at 6 o'clock just like we do, 6 to 7. The people would get out and walk, even in the winter, as their way of saying, we're not buying into this. But we've been brought up to believe, and I think it's been true for most of my life, that there was such a thing as an honest media. Now, I'm not so sure anymore. Crooked politicians we've always had with us. Liars we've always had with us. But what's happening with the media is absolutely, and I mean this now, frightening. All right, stay tuned for more news and information. For more news and information.